all of the life experiences I've had, from going to music school to 20 years worth of ministry experience in a church staff setting. All of that was all leading to being able to use that as a missionary, as a musician, all of that being able to be used in a musical ministry is really fascinating, and it's encouraging that I feel like the gifts and the training that I have are perfectly suited to our life in Germany.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Rebekah, Becca for short, and I'm a clarinetist who studied at the Eastman School of Music and then went to London to get my master's and PhD, both at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Having shifted pathways in my own life, I love hearing about the varied careers musicians can have and how they got there. And that's precisely what we're exploring in this podcast, as I sit down with music graduates to chat about their unique musical journeys, hear their hard-earned wisdom, and learn about how they're orchestrating their own careers. For today's episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Ben Roundtree, a music missionary living and working in Germany. He's the co-director of the brass ensemble Eurobrass, handbell performer with the BellTree Duo, and also does composing, arranging, music publishing, and more. You'll actually recognize a composition of his, Symphony No. 1 in D, which he very kindly let me use as the theme music for this podcast. Ben received both his bachelor's and master's degrees in Tuba Performance from the University of Kentucky and George Mason University, respectively. After graduating, Ben would half-jokingly introduce himself as having 2 degrees in music and no job. But what's so inspiring about this interview is to hear how Ben was able to carve out a musical career for himself, finding a place for his diverse passions and talents to create a rich life. This was one of my first interviews, and there were a couple of hiccups with the filming and audio. We ended up having to switch rooms, so you'll notice a change of scenery and acoustics in the middle of the conversation. It was recorded over the summer, but I saved it for Christmas because one of the coolest things Ben does is play handbells, especially during the Advent season. What makes it even more special is the whole family gets involved. You're currently listening to the Roundtree family under this intro, performing an arrangement by Ben of The Little Drummer Boy. Stay tuned till the end of the episode to hear some more, including clips of other handbell pieces and the Eurobrass ensemble performing a composition by Ben. And now, let's get right into the interview. Hello, Ben, and welcome to the Orchestrating Your Career podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and for being willing to share your musical journey with us. And I'm especially excited to have you on the podcast because up till now, thus far on the podcast, you are the guest who has known me by far the longest. So I met you when I was probably about 12 years old.
I think so.
I was in middle school and I was playing in the handbell choir, which you were directing at the church that we both went to at the time. And then I joined the church orchestra, which you were also music director of. So I played in that for a while. And then after your family moved to Germany, I got to visit you guys in Germany a few years ago. So you've been good friends with my family for a while. And it's really cool to have you on the podcast. And you have a super diverse musical career. You have a lot of different parts that make up what you do. So I think it'll be really interesting to hear about all those different pieces and how you balance all of them. But before that, I'd love to just go back to the very beginning and hear about how you got started in classical music, how you started playing the tuba, and how it all began for you.
As a kid, I always fancied myself. I thought that someday I would become a trumpet player. I was a fan of Tim Zimmerman and the King's Brass, who had come to my church when I was young, and I would get their tapes and listen, and I would sort of hum along, making my own little trumpet sounds. So there was brass music in my head from a pretty early age. I started on trumpet. It seemed like a natural thing to start on.
Was that in school?
In fifth grade in school. Yeah, so that seemed like a natural thing to start with, although I didn't end up being very good at the trumpet.
Oh, well, I mean, probably most people aren't very good at the trumpet when they start.
Yeah, so I switched to euphonium the next year, and by 7th grade I decided for tuba, and started playing in the church orchestra 3 weeks after switching to tuba, and I was part of that orchestra for 30 years.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Longest standing member, potentially.
Just about. Yep.
Is there a particular reason why you wanted to move to the tuba?
I had looked in the instrument storage room, and there was this gigantic thing back there that was bigger than I was. And for some reason, I just thought it would be fun to try.
Huh.
Thankfully, they gave me one that was appropriate sized for my stature at the time.
Yeah. So then what made you decide that you wanted to do music as a career and then decide to go major in it in college?
I think it just seemed obvious from the beginning it just seemed like I always knew I was going to be a music major. And so there's not any one specific spot, but I had lots of positive reinforcement from the beginning of playing. Everyone said, "Oh, you have lots of musical potential." And so all of that encouragement kept helping me think that I should do this as a career.
Did you have any idea what that career could look like at that point?
At that point, I would say it was principal tuba in the Chicago Symphony or bust.
High aspirations.
Yeah, that was. I actually thought that most likely I would have a career in the military, in one of the military bands.
Yeah.
Maybe not one of the top tier ones in DC. But that was what I expected I would do with my life.
Could you talk a little bit about the process of applying to music schools and how you sort of determined where you wanted to go? And you ended up at the University of Kentucky. So could you talk about how that happened? Why that university?
Yeah, when it came time to start thinking about college, I talked to my tuba teacher at the time, Pat Sheridan, my private teacher, and he suggested 5 different schools. And so I went to a place where I could meet several of those professors, got a lesson with a couple of them, and then made my first visit to University of Kentucky a year before college, and did an audition there, and I felt like that was far enough to drive. It was about a 10-hour drive, and I liked the campus, I liked the teacher, Skip Gray, and it seemed like it was a good fit. So that was actually the only school I applied to, and got in. It was not a super competitive, it was not an academically competitive place for me. So it was, it seemed like a good fit. And so that's the only college I applied to.
Gotcha. And what was your experience like there? How did it differ compared to what you're doing in high school, I guess? And could you talk about how your career goals changed during that time, if they did at all?
To compare it with high school, let's see. In my high school band, we had lots of fun in marching band. I enjoyed all aspects of concert and marching band, and did the district bands and all state and things like that. And in college, it got more serious. College marching band was not as much fun for me.
So you did college marching band?
I did. That was part of my scholarship, was to be in the marching band. And so, I just didn't really fit in culturally. I didn't drink alcohol, and so there was a whole lot of that going on in the marching band. And so I had a couple of friends in band, but not a whole lot. And when you're majoring in music and supposed to be practicing multiple hours a day, and instead multiple hours a day are spent on marching band field, and all day Saturday, it was exhausting. And so it wasn't, college marching band was not as much fun as I remember high school band. But it's okay, I survived it. And it helped pay the bills.
Yeah, which is important. So did you always know throughout your undergrad that you were going for this orchestral career still?
Yeah, I think getting into a military band was always my primary goal.
Okay.
Sort of the highest aspiration and what they train you to think is the most important thing in college is getting a symphony job or a military band job.
Yeah.
You don't think too much about what you do if you don't get that. That goal stayed the same. I always planned to get a bachelor's and then get a master's in performance. A lot of people recommended that I start with a music education major. And so I'm a person that likes to do what people expect of me. And so I did that. And
in undergrad.
Okay. I started with music ed major and found that I really didn't want to do that. I was already falling back on it as a safety net, even in undergrad. And I realized that I was not called to be a school music educator. And I decided I knew a lot of great band directors who were gifted and called to do that, and it was their sweet spot. And I would have been a band director that was wishing I was playing all the time. And I think it would have been difficult for me to make it, and I couldn't do both.
Yeah.
I didn't have enough energy to do the coursework for the music ed major and still practice as much as I needed to for the performance side.
So did you switch in your
So I switched after a year and a half.
Okay.
So I
Performance.
To switch to performance. And as I was talking with my tuba professor about it, he said something to me that was comforting at the time, but I think ended up really guiding me throughout all of that. And he said, well, I think you'll be able to find your niche in that. You'll find your way. And he didn't guarantee that I would get one of the 20 full-time professional symphony orchestra jobs in the country. But his using that language was really quite helpful.
That is nice. And I guess, encouraging to hear when you're in the process of trying to figure out where your place would be.
Right.
So then you went on to master's. And what was the decision process for that?
I always planned to go on to a master's in performance. And so I looked at 3 schools, one that has scholarship, assistantship, that pays your way for a master's degree. But I didn't get into that one. And then I looked at Peabody Conservatory, which would have been fantastic. I learned a lot of my audition lesson for that, but it cost a fortune. And I knew at the end of a master's degree in music that I would still only earn a musician's amount of living. I was not going to earn a physician's amount of money and be able to pay back my loans. So it just didn't make sense. And the third option was George Mason University, where I could live at home and pay in-state tuition, which I was able to pay for the graduate school in cash with a part-time job.
Wow.
And so that was a perfect fit. And I liked the teacher. Roger Barron was the perfect teacher for me. And the combination of my undergrad teacher giving me the well-rounded, this is everything you should have studied, all the pieces you should have played, and etudes you should have learned to move on in your career. And then in the master's, I got the finishing touches. It ended up being a great choice, and to be debt-free coming out of bachelor's and master's was ideal.
Yeah, for sure. So you were saying that the distinction between undergrad being more maybe holistic and like looking at, technique and stuff as a player, and then the master's refining those things. And did you feel like in your master's for the training that there was more of a focus, or did you have more of a focus of like, when I come out of this, I'm going to take military band auditions? What was the goal and idea driving you through the master's?
Yeah, so through the master's, I was the academics at George Mason for the master's program were not as stringent as a lot of other places. I didn't have to write a thesis. So I was really there in my own mind to become a better tuba player. And so my teacher there is a euphonium player. And so he didn't push me to play specific repertoire. I could kind of choose the etudes and the focus and the repertoire that I wanted. But I had already been exposed to all of that in undergrad. So, yeah, he just sort of broke things down and built back up from the way he teaches fundamentals of playing. And that really, my goal was to be a consistent player that I could play well all the time. And not just sometimes or randomly or by chance. And so he helped me both mentally with his giving me self-confidence, and technically I was prepared. So at the end of the master's, it came time to start doing military auditions. And at that time, I'd also won a spot in King's Brass and was touring in the summers.
Could you just explain what King's Brass is and how you got into that and what that tour experience looked like?
Sure. So King's Brass was started by Tim Zimmerman in 1978. It started as a brass ensemble of his junior high trumpet students. And Tim himself was a solo trumpet performer, toured with a keyboard player. And so then he's settled in the Detroit area, did one performance with his junior high students, and then started getting asked to perform other places. They said, I heard you had a brass group. And so then he began doing concerts. Started out as a trumpet ensemble, turned into its eventual form of 7 brass players, a keyboard player, and percussionist. And so they've been touring in that format for a long time now. And that was the group that I heard growing up. And I was a fan long before I got to be in the group.
This is coming full circle.
So I finally successfully auditioned for the group during my master's. And so they play concerts. They go for about 11 weeks in the summer, doing 7 or 8 performances a week, 1 day off a week. And it's a paid group. It's great money if you're a college student. Not enough that you could live year round on those several weeks of income. But it was great to be able to do the group for 3 years and made great friends, grew as a performer, and grew as just, I learned a bunch of things not directly about music from being in King's Brass. I learned how to talk in front of people. That was the first time I had to not only introduce myself, but I had to read some poetry stuff in the middle of the concert, and I had to memorize it and speak it every night. And so that was terrifying at first. I learned how to talk to people after a concert, how to answer the top 5 questions that you get answered after a concert, and answer those gracefully and in a way that makes the person asking them feel like they got to know you a little bit.
What kind of questions are those? The top 5 questions.
Probably, how did the group come together? And which can either be answered with a joke version or the real answer.
Which I feel like you just gave us quite eloquently.
Right. And then just what's it like being on tour? Or so I learned essentially to make small talk. Which before that point in my life, I had never made small talk, never just made conversation. I was just focused on I am a tuba player.
Practice room.
Spending lots of hours in a practice room by yourself doesn't necessarily prepare you socially to be a professional musician.
Not so much.
So I took one military audition. The only one I've ended up taking was during that King's Brass tour. So.
And this was still during your master's. You hadn't yet.
This is during the master's, right? But you can't really prepare for an audition when you're on tour,
Yeah.
performing concerts every night.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do well in that audition, not surprisingly, but it got my feet wet.
Yeah.
And right around that time, I began to realize that because of my asthma, that the military no longer really made exceptions for that. A generation before, it might have been possible. So my dream of a military career came to a grinding halt at the end of my master's degree. So that was a surprise because everything had sort of had that singular goal of what I thought was the best thing for me to do with my life.
Yeah.
My teachers, my private teachers and lots of friends had been in military bands, and I thought that would be a good life. So I came to the end of my master's with 2 degrees and no job and not really any clarity on what would happen at that point.
Yeah. So you were doing King's Brass overlapping between your master's and graduating.
Right.
Okay. And then you were saying before that you came to the end of your master's with your career idea basically gone and not really knowing exactly what you're going to do now. So could you talk about that period of transitioning from being a student to a professional and how you were feeling and what your approach then was, knowing that what your previous career goal was kind of off the table now?
Yeah, my introduction on King's Brass tour the summer after I graduated with my master's was, "Hi, I'm Ben Roundtree. I have 2 degrees and no job." And
relatable.
Right. I really didn't have a plan, but as a believer in Christ, I knew that God had some sort of plan for me, and I just didn't know what it was. So I had a sense that all of my training was not for nothing, but I also didn't know, practically speaking, what was going to happen next. I had a very distinct plan up to that point, and so I tried working with a high school marching band, which I found immediately was not my calling.
What were you doing for them?
I was helping the low brass with their marching
Coaching
preparation. Kind of coaching,
Yeah.
Running sectionals and helping them. And I just found that was not remotely my calling. I was not good at it. The fact that I loved high school band did not make me a good educator.
Yeah.
And so that I did that. I fulfilled my obligation, but I wasn't very good at it. And it was clear that was not a direction I should go. And then I answered an ad in the church bulletin that was looking for a music secretary. And so I interviewed for that, took a typing test, and then got the job. So I began doing administrative things for the music director who I had known since I was in his children's choir. So it seems like an obvious and natural fit. That's where I started and found my way into doing that. I ended up working there full time for almost 20 years.
So the church secretary job, that was full-time work.
It was full time. It was doing some of the things that I had done before in high school as a part-time music librarian at the church. So I had already had experience working there, but this was full time and doing mostly administrative stuff, not very much music.
And how much playing were you doing at this time?
At this point, I played in a group on Mondays. Monday night's a wind band, and I played most weekends in worship services in one or the other of the ensembles. So then I was not practicing full-time like in college. I was beginning to figure out how much I needed to play, how much I needed to practice in order to not embarrass myself as a performer, but I didn't have time to be practicing all the time.
And did you have thoughts at this point of what your goals were, or like how they had shifted, or if you had any other ideas on what you wanted to do musically, or if you were thinking that you just kind of shifted to a more maybe administrative career?
I was thankful to have a job.
Yeah.
Anyone that gets 2 music performance degrees is in danger of working at McDonald's, and I knew that. So I was grateful to have a steady job, and a lot of times I would find my musical flex my musical muscles in other things like playing the tuba, or I had a brass quintet going of people that also have a day job. And so I enjoyed rehearsing and performing with them. And so I got some of my musical satisfaction elsewhere. While I was in King's Brass, that was the first time I had heard of something called a church instrumental director as a profession that you can do. A lot of churches have orchestras, especially in the southeast. So a lot of times there's a full-time position for an orchestra director. So I had heard of those things, but we were just getting our first one of those at McLean, which did not end up being me. So I was still assisting that position. But through working with the instrumental director at McLean, I began to have an idea of how this could fit and use all of my gifts, all of the things about music that I like, including arranging, which I had been doing since I was probably 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you got into that. Like, how did you get interested in arranging?
It started with playing in the brass group at church, and I wrote, there was a choir anthem that I really loved based on a spiritual, and so I decided I would write a brass quintet arrangement of that. And I showed it to the musicians, and so we played it one Sunday morning, and they gave me pointers on what kinds of things I needed to include. Also, like dynamics and some phrasing kinds of things, but they gave me feedback right away. And at this time, when I was in high school, I was working with the organist of the church who took me under his wing and began to show me some arranging things. First, he taught me how to write music by hand, and then he taught me how to use Finale music notation program. And so from there, I was off to the races with arranging things. In college, I realized that none of my other friends could do this arranging thing. It just seemed natural and obvious to me. It was, but it was clearly an area that I had potential in, and so I did some private orchestration lessons after my orchestration class in college.
Oh, cool.
And so as I was working the administrative music job, I was able to keep writing music for the worship services, and I did that all the way until I became the instrumental director eventually, and was writing as one of the main things I did in my job.
Yeah, can you talk a little more about how that transition happened, how you became music director, and what were you thinking in terms of continued direction of your career? Had you kind of decided, okay, auditions are off the table, music director is more what I'm thinking is fitting into my life?
Yeah, at that point I realized I didn't have the potential, I hadn't put in the right kind of time to develop myself into an orchestra career. And so I realized that was off the table. So I think I was looking more towards just being a musician who earns his living in the church. Eventually, my focus shifted from I'm a musician who gets to exercise my music in the church. My focus shifted to I really feel like I'm called to serve our congregation and to serve the musicians in our church in more of being a pastor to musicians kind of a role. And I got to make an official job change to do that eventually and to be licensed as a minister. Eventually, when the instrumental director before me, Fletch Wiley, when he left, that opened up the chance for me to step into his role and to do that as, not just musically, but to the pastoral kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
still with my main focus being on music
Yeah.
and leading and being a pastor to musicians.
Yeah. That's really cool. Were you doing other things on the side of the music director position?
There were a lot of side projects that I did. I began my self-publishing arrangements website that had been in development for years, but I made the decision to self-publish rather than working through arrangers. I had been doing that and writing for various groups, but especially for Dominion Brass when it started. It was a group, it still is a group of professional brass players who are believers, and they do sacred and classical concerts to benefit different ministries. So each concert has a beneficiary, and all of the professional musicians volunteer for this group, and it's volunteer-led. So I wrote for the group from the very beginning, and also played tuba from the beginning. And then eventually I became the assistant director of of that group. And so there were seasons where I was doing more administrative things and in my job at the church, and where Dominion Brass was my main musical outlet. So as a performer and as a writer.
Yeah. How do you feel like you took on a lot of the additional responsibilities that were not so much music related? Because your degrees are in music performance, but it sounds like a lot of the work that you're doing, especially your full-time jobs, were not so much in line with those degrees. So how did you learn the skills and step into those roles without that, I guess, formal training? Were you like training on the job, or do you feel like you had other experiences that helped prepare you for those?
I think most of the things I did then in ministry and in church music, I learned as I went. If you've had music theory training and can analyze Bach chorales, you have enough harmonic vocabulary to work with the kind of modern worship music, the pop music that we did in the worship services. So I didn't need any more theory and harmony training to do what I was doing, but I just needed experience.
Yeah.
And I always had administrative gifts also, organizational skills that came into play in organizing musicians and doing the bits of contracting musicians that were involved in the job. And so those are things I just sort of learned how to do. The ministry aspects I learned from bosses in the music department and just from being around a church staff environment. There were lots of role models, and we did a lot of leadership training on the staff. So I learned a lot about how to be a leader through the books we read and the conferences I attended. There was a lot that I learned from just reading books and that kind of learning. The writing aspect, the best way to become a better composer and arranger is to write stuff and have audiences and musicians tell you whether it worked or not and what worked and what didn't. So getting the immediate feedback. If I wrote something Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it got played on Sunday, that's immediate feedback on what works and what doesn't. One course that I had in undergraduate, while I was still a music ed major, that prepared me perhaps the most for my life as a composer was string methods. While I was still an ed major, you have to learn how to play all the different instruments to some degree. So I never really got much past Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the violin. But I stayed on, even after I switched out of the education major, I stayed on for a whole year of string methods. And growing up as a wind player and playing in wind bands, I knew what those things sounded like. But the techniques of string player, I didn't ever become even remotely proficient at the instrument, but I learned how things work, how bowing works, and how at a basic level to perform some of the techniques. So that plus writing things for string players every week and having them tell me what worked. So,
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you talk about all these different parts of even just like the music director job. I wonder if you could, describe like specifically what the different roles of being a music director at a church, because it sounds like there's a lot more than maybe people might think of that are involved.
So when I became the instrumental director, eventually an instrumental pastor title, I spent a lot of time working with the worship leaders, the song leaders who are choosing the songs we sing every week. So there was a lot of time spent with them, planning the services, organizing things. I still had to organize the players and make schedules, make long-term, year-long schedules for which ensembles come on which weeks, things like that. So that was some administrative things, the carrying out of the rehearsals and the weekend services. We did service on Saturday and 3 on Sunday. It's sometimes 4 on Sunday. And so the just number of hours spent on Saturday and Sunday, those were both essentially a full work day. So then there was the writing of arrangements every week. What we were doing musically was not something that you can just buy arrangements for and use them exactly as they are. So one of the joys of my job was being able to write custom arrangements every week that fit the unique style that we were trying to do as a church. So we did it a little bit differently than anybody else was doing it. So the writing then took up, I don't know, maybe half of my work week. Sometimes 110, 120% of the job that was required was extra writing. So
it's very interesting to hear you talk about it, because I played in the orchestra, and like I would just arrive to rehearsal and my clarinet part would be there on the stand for me, and I wouldn't really think that much about that you had to custom arrange a lot of those songs every single time we were playing for all of us. So it's really cool. And I think also just to hear about, it's a very musical job. Like obviously you're using a lot of musical skills and training to do what you're doing. Music theory and arranging and composing and conducting and those kinds of musical skills, but not so much like tuba playing skills. How did you feel shifting from doing performance degrees to like using a lot of these other musical skills instead?
It meant that I was not playing all the time and not always in my peak performing shape. So I learned to be a seasonal practicer. So when there was an event that I needed to perform for, I knew what it would take to get practiced up and to be in performance shape, but I couldn't afford the time to be in performance shape all year round. So it was great to have goals of special ensemble performances. Dominion Brass was one of the main ones for that. And so I could be in performing shape for those. So I became good at knowing what it takes to work into shape, and then I could go weeks or months without touching an instrument sometimes as well. So I did learn that you cannot do everything all the time. You cannot be in full-time performance shape and be writing lots and lots of music and conducting and going to meetings. And there were a few times where I learned sometimes you just need a sick week to get caught up on your work. Where a sick week where I didn't have to go to meetings. So I could just be sick and working at home. I mean, I was actually sick, but that allowed me to work, get caught up. Later, as I've gotten older, I've come to accept that I just cannot be everything to everybody all the time. And so, doing things seasonally was a good way for that to work out.
I like that. I don't think I've heard that phrase before, seasonal performer, but I feel like it's really encouraging to hear about it, or because I feel like a lot of musicians might feel like it's all or nothing, like either you're performing all the time or you're not performing at all. But it's clearly possible to have a career where it's part of it, but it's not the whole part of it. And you're having seasons where you're playing, like you just came off of a tour, so you were playing a lot for the summer. So there's like seasons where you're performing and playing a lot and doing that side of your career, and then there's other seasons where you're not. And I think that's really encouraging, to hear the balance.
Mm-hmm. It was important to me all along, even before I got married and before I had kids, to leave space in advance to build my life so that there would be space to have a family someday if that was going to have happened. So there were things that I did to bring family balance into things. So I stopped playing in the wind band for probably 15 years from the time that my daughters were born. And that was just one more night out of the week that I decided it was more important to carve out time for a family when the kids are young. That's something I learned from my dad, who passed up promotions so that he could stay in a job where he excelled and where he could go to work, and then he could come home from work and have time to be a dad and to be available to his family. So where he could have moved up in his organization, he chose not to.
I guess getting into family balance and everything, because we've talked a lot about your role as the music director, but could you talk more about what you're doing right now and the different pieces of your career? Because I know that handbells are a large part of your career, and we haven't even touched on that yet. And that's like a whole nother piece. So,
Right. Yeah, there are so many.
There's so many pieces.
And there's so many different parts to making a living as a musician. So the handbell piece comes into how I became friends with my wife, Erin. Became friends while learning to bring handbell duets together.
And this
began in 1999.
Okay.
That began our friendship. We began bringing handbells. Then we always would do it at Christmas time. We would play a couple of pieces in church at Christmas time each year.
But did you play handbells before that? How did you even come to I'm gonna pick up a handbell?
This plays into the story of meeting Erin.
Okay.
So the way handbells came into play was, it started with, there was a friend who told me that Erin was coming back from college and that I should become friends with her. I filed that away for use if it ever came up.
Yeah.
But then before I got to get to know Erin, her mom called and needed help with finale for some handbell arrangements for the church. And so I said, well, of course, I love to help people with finale questions as a full-time finale user since I was 14 years old. That's an area in which I'm experienced and I love to help people. So as in the process of helping her with music engraving for this arrangement, then she saw that I might be somebody who could be recruited for the handbell world. And Erin's mom successfully recruited me and talked me into taking over the handbell choir at McLean because she had already started another group. So I became a handbell director without ever having rung handbells other than substituting a couple of times. Ringing duets with Erin became a way of learning the craft of ringing handbells while also being a director. So I went to conferences and beginner courses and learned about the handbell world, being mentored by my mother-in-law, eventually my mother-in-law. So, and then learning from the masters at conferences and things. So then if you fast forward to 2016, it became clear that it was time for us to move on our idea of moving to Germany to do music ministry full-time there. And handbells were going to be a big component of that. So for the handbell part of that, when we moved to Germany, we took bells with us and have begun introducing handbells to audiences in Germany. There are just a few handbell choirs, but wherever we go, bells are unknown. And it was also the first time we needed to play more than 3 or 4 pieces at a time. So we had a small repertoire, but then we have then developed full programs. We now have a full Christmas, Advent and Christmas program and a non-Christmas program also. So, and for these we developed accompaniment tracks. I didn't want to just use computer-generated piano accompaniment. And since I know lots of musicians who know how to record and perform music, then I've used many of my friends to help create accompaniment tracks that are living, breathing music that fits, that I've arranged to complement the handbell sound. So no one wants to listen to an hour and a half of two people playing only the bells they can get in their four hands. We can do a lot with two bells in each hand. We have a series of 8-bell handbell pieces, but even that is limited.
Could you just expand then now on what you're doing now and your move to Germany and what your role doing music ministry in Germany looks like, how all the different pieces sort of fit into that?
So the main part of our work in Germany is with Eurobrass. It's a brass ensemble that was founded 45 years ago by an American man who moved to Germany to teach at a Bible institute there. He was there as the music teacher, and he got the idea to start a brass group. And so the group has progressed over these 45 years, and for about the last 25 years, it's had a 3.5-week summer tour format, which allows professional and college students to come to Germany and play classical and sacred music concert tour, where we talk about the gospel and we play great music. And our goal is to encourage believers and to encourage brass musicians to grow spiritually and musically as a team, and to serve each other and to serve brass players in Germany. I first performed with that group in 2000 and have always been interested in the group since that time and have done what I could. But beginning in 2012, I was able to go back for a full tour, and the idea for living in Germany was born that summer when Aaron and I went on a vacation together after the tour. And so now, having moved there full-time as supported missionaries, half of my work is with Eurobrass. I'm involved in writing music for the tour and helping plan it. And then year-round, the three of us who are German-speaking members of the Eurobrass leadership team, we travel around Germany doing workshops and trainings with brass choirs. We train them musically, we work with them spiritually as well, and that's an ongoing component of the work of Eurobrass. And then a lot of these places where we've been as workshops, they then invite Eurobrass, the ensemble, to do a concert there, and so that's how the cycle works. For us in Germany.
And so the main work you're doing in Germany is Eurobrass, and then handbells you're also bringing in how?
So we've set up our own concert ministry with the handbells. So in Advent, we usually end up doing the bulk of our performances. Well, all 4 weekends of Advent we're performing somewhere. So we've had anywhere from 8 to maybe 13 or 14 performances in that season. And then we have a recording studio at home where in our handbell practice room is also a place where we can record. We've recorded our first handbell album, released that in 2020, and then we'll be working this next year for Christmas 2024. We'll hope to release a non-Christmas handbell album. So that takes lots of steps from writing music to recording it. I do all the editing and then send it to a professional for mixing and mastering.
I guess first question is, do you consider yourself like a freelance musician or music missionary, or like are they the same? And then I guess second question, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I guess, how you financially support yourself and your family with the different pieces of your musical career. Does that make sense?
Yeah, first and foremost, we are supported Missionaries with Artists in Christian Testimony International. They're based out of Nashville area and were founded 50 years ago by Byron Spradlin, who himself is an artist and theologian and encourager of artists. And so it began as a way for him to raise support so that he could be full-time as an artist and encourager of artists.
Yeah.
And so we raise support. Almost all of our income comes through individual personal donors who give to ACT. That's the money from which we live, so that we're free in Germany to do things like working with Eurobrass without needing to earn a living from the ministry work we do. When we do handbell concerts, there is some income from our concerts. So that's a picture of the puzzle. That's a piece of the puzzle, part of the picture. And so then there are little trickles of income from self-publishing sheet music. Right, but that's not ever very much money. It's one of the little trickles. And this last year, I together with Chris Woods, the other Eurobrass writer, we made a music book, songbook of arrangements for German brass choirs they're native to the way that their music is laid out, but it sounds like my and Chris's individual voice as arrangers and composers. Projects like that bring a little bit of income, but it allows us to essentially volunteer our work. So our concerts don't have to make money. So we live financially from the support of our home church is a portion of our support, but mostly probably 90% of what we receive is from individuals who we've invited to partner with us financially.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the transition from having a full-time music director job and then moving to this kind of position where you're getting financial help from individual supporters?
So it was a really beautiful thing to work full-time at the church for almost 20 years and to have medical benefits and retirement and all those things that are great about having a steady job. And that was a wonderful, stable way to make a living. I never had to play gigs to make ends meet. Never had to eat ramen noodles if I didn't want to. That was a really wonderful blessing, a great way to be able to raise a family and to do music. So then suddenly we go from a steady job to having to spend time raising supporters. So thankfully, through a buyout that was being offered at the church at the same time, we were able to be financially well taken care of. There was no major gap. We had the ability to raise our support in time for us to move as scheduled to Germany. So when you live from donations, that money comes and goes. You're essentially always needing to invite new people to join your partnership team as people retire or the economy changes and things like that. So it's always a component to living as a missionary, but it's also freeing to be able to say yes to a lot of great opportunities.
Thanks. I appreciate you being willing to explain that and describe it, because I think especially in the sort of freelance musician world, I think it can be difficult to know how people are surviving, how people are making money, and in the many different varied pathways that musicians can go down, this being one of them. I think it's just helpful to get a better idea of how people are going about it and how people are able to make it work. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting idea that I had never heard of. The thought of being a missionary. I'm not a preacher. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a doctor without borders or any of the more traditional ways of doing foreign overseas cross-cultural ministry. I met a couple of people that do that as their life's calling as a musician. So it's really fascinating to think that all of the life experiences I've had, from going to music school to 20 years worth of ministry experience in a church staff setting, all of that was all leading to being able to use that as a missionary, as a musician, all of that being able to be used in a musical ministry is really fascinating, and it's encouraging that I feel like the gifts and the training that I have are perfectly suited to our life in Germany.
Yeah, and it sounds like it, and it's cool, as you're saying, to chart through, like you're saying, all of the experiences that have led up to it, all of the different positions, and even going from like music librarian or secretary librarian, music director, and now using all of these things that you've picked up and developed over the years to what you're doing now is really cool to see. I'm just curious, especially since moving to Germany, how that's been different, culture shock, or like how the adjustments it's been for you and your family to go from living in the U.S. to living and working in Germany.
German culture is not as different from American culture as if we'd gone to Asia or Africa, but there have been lots of things to learn. Both Aaron and I had German in school growing up, and were exposed to a lot of elements of German culture. Yeah. We had both done short-term things in Germany, and we did some cross-cultural training, reading ahead of time, and we come from a metropolitan area in the Washington D.C. area where we've been exposed to lots of different cultures. So there wasn't a drastic culture shock as much as it could have been, and we're also not 20 years old and going overseas for the first time. Yeah. So there are lots of unique things, wonderful things about German culture that we've enjoyed, and there are things we miss about American culture.
Yeah. Could you list one favorite thing about German culture or living in Germany, and one challenge or something you really miss from the U.S.?
One of the things I really love about German culture is the place that music and the arts still have, although the Germans would say that it's diminished also in their culture, it's not as far diminished as it is in the U.S. So there's a sense of love and respect for professional classical musicians in a way that I didn't in the States. Yeah. And then that also plays out. There's this great brass playing tradition in German churches. There are thousands of church brass choirs. It's a little bit like the Salvation Army, how they have their brass bands that's built into their culture. They can take a kid off the street that doesn't have anything to do after school, give him an instrument and teach him or her how to play it, and they can begin playing and having an ensemble experience from very early on. And so that's the way it is in these church brass choirs. Yeah. They train, usually the director or somebody else within the choir trains the musicians, and you can grow up playing with multiple generations in the same ensemble. So the playing level is not, it's a very amateur focused playing level, but you can perform often with your parents and grandparents in this ensemble. Yeah. And all the generations are playing together, and its stated goal is to play music for worship. Aww. Yeah, so to play in worship services and to play in retirement homes and hospitals. That's a regular, multiple times a year part of the culture. So that whole world doesn't exist like that in the States. So I love being part of that. Yeah, that for culture. Sure. Amazing. And anything you particularly miss from the U.S.? I miss having a big selection and lots of options in the States. My favorite example is the grocery store cereal aisle. Oh, very specific. I'm an eater of cereal for breakfast, have been lifelong, and that's like a quarter mile long full
Yes.
of cereal boxes and options in an American grocery store. And in Germany, there are a few options. There are options, but that's never
Greatly
more
diminished.
than 20, 25 feet wide of cereal options. And now that I have celiac disease and can't eat regular cereal, I have only 2 cereals that I can really eat in Germany. And in the States, I still have 15 or 20 options in the States.
Yeah, I do feel like food options in the US in general, there's a lot of diversity.
It can be paralyzed if you really don't need that many choices. But for me, that's...
where it's already whittled down for you.
Right.
Yeah, I understand. Last question before we get to the final quick section. If you just had any advice, either for your younger self, like you entering music school for your undergraduate degree or just coming out of your musical training, or for a young musician today entering the musical career field, what would be your big piece of advice or something you wish you had known at that point that you feel like you gained over the years?
I think I might say the same thing that my professor told me, which was if you work hard, you will be able to find a way. There will be a way.
You'll find your place.
Yeah, and all of the musical training, things like taking my tuba playing to a master's degree in performance level, that sets the baseline for your total musicianship. So even if you go away from the instrument for a few years and come back to it as a hobby, you still will always benefit from how far you took your art. So that's different from someone that just played up and through high school and then picks it up later in life. You'll get back to that level where you took it, but you'll be limited in your progress. So even if you don't end up playing your instrument for which you got a performance degree as your profession, that's still the discipline involved in that and the musicianship that grows that still benefits, that has transfer into life skills. But just to expect that you're going to make your living from a diverse amount of things, and there is life after music school, even if you don't end up playing for a living and end up going into computers or something else. All of the personal discipline it takes to get your degree in music actually does transfer to real life. You'll have to learn specific skills. It's still worth it to take your shot at being a performing musician, even if it doesn't work out and you do something else.
That's really encouraging. And I think, just as we were saying, it's really cool how you had this very fixed idea of a military band job, and that isn't what happened for you. But still, all of the experiences that you had, all of the training that you had, all of the background that you had, it feels like that's really, all of it's come into play and more into what you're doing now. So it feels like you really have found your place, even though it wasn't what you had originally thought it would be. So
I would agree, and I think the life that I've ended up doing is even richer than it would have been if I had gotten that military job and had to play my tuba for a living, and that would take up most of the energy I had. I would have missed out on being able to write so much and to see people's lives changed in a church ministry setting, in a cross-cultural ministry setting.
And we didn't even touch on it, but you're an amazing composer as well, not just arranger. And like a lot of the pieces that I've heard that you've written are beautiful and amazing. And if you were spending so much of your time just playing, then maybe you wouldn't have had time to develop those arranging skills or those composing skills, and then we wouldn't have the blessing of hearing those pieces. So
true, and I really have enjoyed quite a diverse array of things, and that's it. I think I could have been happy doing just one of those things also. But that's just sort of the way things have gone, and I enjoy doing lots of different kinds of things.
Amazing that you get to do all of the different kinds of things, and it's really interesting to hear how you've been able to balance them all. And I like the idea of seasonal playing, or like, because it feels like you just have all these different seasons, like a composing season or an arranging season and playing season.
I've figured out that my best way of functioning is to just do one thing at a time. To block everything else out. And that's what I have to do when I do composing. If there's a music tour coming up, that's what I do with practicing. And so that I just function better that way. You can't always do that in life because you have to pay the bills and return emails and things like that. But that's why this idea of seasonal things seems to work really well for me. And I have an understanding family that knows I'm going to go off in one direction for a while.
Cool. Well, just the very last part of the interview, I thought it would be fun, hopefully, to do a little rapid fire section. So just top of mind, whatever is in your head today, on the day, at this moment in time, this is your favorite, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. So today, who would you say your favorite composer is?
Favorite composer today is Bach.
Bach. Nice. Classic. How about your favorite piece of classical music?
I probably have 200 favorite pieces of classical music, but the one on my mind the moment is Intermezzo Sinfonico from Cavaliere Rusticana.
Oh, wow.
By
Okay.
Mascagni.
Very nice.
We're set to perform that on tour. We performed it on last year's tour.
Okay.
And I had an experience with that during COVID that really helped me through one of the toughest times where I was feeling lonely. I decided to work on an arrangement of it, and it helped me. The beauty of it and transcribing it gave me a great experience.
Amazing.
Not so rapid, but...
No. Yeah. It's all good. Explanations are welcome. How about favorite movie soundtrack?
Ooh. There are so many.
It's true.
Oh, boy.
These are hard questions. I'm aware.
I think I might go for all-time favorite on that, which would be the original 3 Star Wars soundtracks.
Can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with John Williams in general.
Including Jabba the Hutt, the tuba solo that is on the soundtracks but didn't make the movie.
Oh, wow. Okay, I will have to go look that one up.
Yep.
What genre of music would you say you listen to most of the time?
I might say the most surprising, could I answer the most surprising genre music that I listen to often is country music.
Oh, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, I started listening to, I've listened to it on and off in different seasons of life. And I tend to like the songs that are really funny and the ones that are heartfelt. I can't connect with actual living a country music kind of lifestyle or lots of the topics that they have, but I love the storytelling, the way they tell a story in a country song, and the way they tell a funny story.
Yeah. What's a top country artist that you recommend?
It's hard to say, but Mary Chapin Carpenter has some fun songs, like Sometimes You're the Windshield, Sometimes You're the Bug.
I have heard that
Sometimes You're the Louisville Slugger, Sometimes You're the Ball. Stuff like that is
nice.
I find really
strong imagery. Yeah. What are you currently reading?
Currently reading a novel series by Stephen Lawhead. It's sort of fantasy, Middle Ages kind of thing it has very spiritual elements to it. It's a series I read as a kid and I'm rereading it. So that's something current. The other thing I'm reading now is to work on my German. I'm reading John Grisham novels in German.
Oh, wow.
So he's one of my favorite authors for his storytelling style and that sort of thing. So
nice.
And I'm motivated to read in German because I like how he tells stories.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
What's the last thing you listened to?
Well, the last thing I listened to was in the car yesterday. I listened to Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony. Nice. Not with my usual New York Philharmonic version, but I listened to Berlin with Kirill Petrenko.
Very nice.
It was also good. They're also okay.
Yeah. Just a bit. And a musician you really admire?
Let's see. This is a friend who's no longer living, but Sam Shu, Dr. Sam Shu was a pianist and a teacher on the faculty at a music camp where I went for 5 summers.
Wow.
And
what was the music camp?
There was the Chehi School of Music, and they were based in Pennsylvania and then a little while in New York, and they're back in Pennsylvania. So over the summers, I got to know him. His famous piano teacher told him when he was young that he had what it takes to become one of the 3 best pianists in the world.
Wow.
And so he was of that level of musician, and yet I feel like he was my personal friend and mentor in faith as well as in life. So
amazing. And the last one, if there was one resource, so a book, song, movie, podcast, piece of music, anything that you recommend someone should go check out right now, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Let's see. On music topic, I think there's a podcast I've listened to a lot called The Portfolio Composer. And I've enjoyed listening to that, not as much in the last 2 years or so, but as a way to learn about composing, but about how your life is really, as a musician, is a portfolio of a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
A lot of times small business owner, and you're an advocate for yourself, and you're selling yourself and your product and marketing. And anyway, in that podcast, he brings together lots of different things and experts in lots of different things. So that one's been something that over the last couple of years that's stimulated my thinking, not just about composing, but just about life as a musician.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll definitely link all of those in the show notes. Amazing. Well, that's everything. Is there any final thoughts that you would want to share just to finish things off?
This has been really fun. I've enjoyed knowing you, Rebekah, for a long time, since you joined my handbell choir and my orchestra, and since you started learning hardcore music theory.
I was in your music theory homeschool class.
And it's been
good times.
It's been fun to know you and your family and to see your growth and development as a musician. And well,
thanks. And it's been fun for me. And I think for any musician, their mentors and teachers are so important to their development in their life. And I feel really fortunate that I've had really kind and talented and amazing musical mentors like you in my life that definitely helped me get to where I got to. So likewise, very grateful.
I wish you well in your podcasting
endeavors
here too.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you again for coming on and for imparting all of your wisdom. So,
well, thanks.
Amazing. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Orchestrating Your Career podcast, and a big thank you to Ben for sharing his musical journey and his advice. I forgot to ask Ben at the end of our interview the best way to connect with him and all of the work that he's doing, but I asked him afterwards, so the links for that and the resources mentioned in this episode are all included below. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms, and get more frequent updates on Instagram. To watch videos of all the episodes and get extra behind-the-scenes content, check out the YouTube channel Orchestrating Your Career. Subscribe so you don't miss anything, and look out for new episodes on the 1st and 15th of the month. We'll take off January 1st for the holidays, so the next episode will be on January 15th with Rachel Roberts, Associate Professor of Music Leadership and Graduate Degree Program Director at the Eastman School of Music. She actually started out as a flute performance major at Eastman, so it's fascinating to hear her journey. I hope you'll join me for her episode on the 15th. In the meantime, I'm wishing you a very happy Christmas and New Year's. Here is Ben and his family, plus the Eurobrass ensemble, to end our episode off with some holiday cheer. So take it away, Roundtrees!